we'll continue our discussion on strip plots. We mentioned that we can pass the hue attribute. Let's see an example of that. So we'll call the strip plot method and then pass day as our x-axis and total bill as our y-axis. Total bill, and our data comes from the tips dataset. And for hue, let's pass 6 and run it. Okay, let's load our dataset again. Tips sns.load dataset and then tips. Okay, now let's run it again. So here we have a strip plot for each of our days on our x-axis and total bill on the y-axis. And we have hue 6, male in blue and female in green. Similarly, we can pass a jitter attribute and set it to be true. We'll see a more dispersed jitter for our hue. Here both the data for male and female is kind of mingled together. If we want it separate, we can pass the split attribute and set it to be true. So let me copy this, paste it here, and pass the split attribute and set it to true. Now if we run it, we see separate strip plots for male and female for each of our days: Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, let's look at another example and take smoker as hue. So we have sns.strip plot. For our x-axis, we'll use the day attribute. For y-axis, we'll use our total bill data or variable. Our data comes from the tips dataset. For hue, we'll set it to be smoker, and we'll set jitter to be equal to true. Okay, before we split it, it looks like this. And now let's split it by passing the split attribute and setting it to be true. Run it now. Now we have smoker, yes and no for each of the days. We can also pass the palette attribute and set it to a different color. Okay, let's go to a new line. So for our palette, let's pass a palette known as, I think, winter R. Run it. So this is what it looks like. We have smoker in light green and dark blue, smoker in light green, non-smoker in blue for each of our days. So here the days are presenting from Thursday through Sunday. We can also pass the order attribute and control the order in which the days are presented. Okay, let's see an example of that. So I'll copy this and paste it down here, and let's pass the order attribute and pass the order that we want to see. For instance, if I want to see Friday first, followed by maybe Sunday, and then Saturday, and Thursday at last, we can do that and run it. Okay, now we have the order that we passed here: Friday, followed by Sunday, Saturday, and finally Thursday. And we can change the order for any of the attributes on the x-axis. Let's see one more example and draw a strip plot for, let's say, 6 versus tip. So sns.strip plot. For our x-axis, we'll pass 6, and for our y-axis, we'll pass tips. and our data comes from the tips dataset. Let's run it. So here is our strip plot. By sex we have male and then female. If we want female to be presented first, we can pass that by using the order attribute. So we can say order is equal to, and then pass the list of the order that we want to see. In this case, female first, followed by male. Let's run it. Okay, now we have female first, followed by male. We can pass the palette attribute and use a different palette for our strip plot. Let's say HUSL, run it again, and then we get a different palette. We can also use different shape for our data points. Here our data points are circles, and we can pass a marker attribute to display a different marker for our data points. Let's see an example of that. So if I copy this, let's copy that, paste it here, and pass the marker attribute, and let's pass a plus sign, for instance, and run it. We don't have a plus marker. Let's pass a diamond. Okay, so now our data points are presented by a diamond instead of a circle. Let's see another example. Let's see day versus total bill. So SNS.strip plot. For our x-axis we'll use day. For our y-axis we'll use total bill. Data comes from the tips dataset, and for marker let's use a diamond and run it. So now we have a diamond as our marker, and we can change the size of this diamond by passing the size attribute. Let's use a size of 15 maybe and see what it looks like. Okay, now the size is bigger, we have bigger diamonds, bigger data points. That's by passing the size attribute. Another thing we can do is pass the hue attribute. Let's pass the hue attribute, and let's use sex, for instance. Run it. So now we have sex, male and female. And if we want it to be more visible, there's another attribute that we can pass known as the age color. So age color, and let's set it to be maybe gray and run it. Let's go to a new line. So for our age color we have set gray, but we don't clearly see any difference from our previous graph. So what we'll do is pass another attribute known as alpha, and we'll pass different numbers for this alpha attribute, and that will control the way our strip plot is presented. Let's pass a value of 0.2 and see what it looks like. You see now it looks a bit different. The aging looks different. Let's pass 0.3. So that's how it looks different. Let's pass the jitter attribute and set it to true. See what it looks like. It looks like that. And now let's pass the split attribute and set it to true. See, now it looks much more different. So we can use a combination of one or more attributes in our strip plot. Here we have used a bunch of attributes. Let's add one more attribute, which is the palette attribute, and set it to maybe a QSL. We have that. We can also pass the order attribute and change the order in which the days are presented. So this is an example of how we can use a few attributes in a single plot. So the ones I wanted to focus are the marker attribute. So we passed a different marker, for instance D for a diamond, and we also passed a size attribute, which helps us control the size of our data points, and this edge color gives it a different appearance for our strip plot, and we can adjust that by passing the alpha attribute to make it lighter or darker. If we pass 0.5, it looks like that. So you can play around with this alpha attribute and pass different colors. And we have seen the jitter and split attributes. Another thing we can do is draw a strip plot on top of a box plot. So we can have both of those plots in the same graph. Let's see an example of that. So SNS.strip plot, and then let's consider tip versus day. For our x-axis we'll use tip, and for our y-axis we'll use day, and the data comes from the tips data set. Okay, and let's do the same for our box plot. So SNS.box plot, and then for our x-axis we'll pass the same tip, and then for our y-axis we'll pass day, and the data comes from the tips dataset. Okay, let's run it and see what it looks like. So we have a box plot and a strip plot in the same graph. Make sure you have both of the plots in the same cell, otherwise you'll get separate plots and separate graphs. Okay, another thing we can do for our strip plot is pass other attributes. For instance, we can pass the jitter attribute, jitter, and set it to true. Run it again. So you have a more dispersed strip plot. And let's pass a color attribute, palette, and set it to, let's say, winter _r. Now we have different coloration, and if you remember, we can pass the color attribute also and pass various colors to make it appear darker or lighter. For instance, if I pass a value of 0.1, it will look darker compared to our previous graph. So let's pass another value for our color. Let's say 0.4, and we have that. Let's pass a value of 1. So you can pass different values to control the color of your plot. Similarly, we can draw a strip plot and a violin plot on the same graph. Let's look at an example of that. We'll consider tip versus day variables. So SNS.strip plot, and we'll pass tip for our x-axis, and for our y-axis we'll pass day, and data comes from our tips dataset, and let's pass the jitter attribute and set it to be true. And now let's complete some data for our violin plot. So we'll call the violin plot method and pass the same x and y attributes. We'll pass tip, and for our y we'll pass day, and our data comes from the tips dataset. Okay, if we run it, we have a violin plot and a strip plot. Here our strip plot doesn't look to be much visible, so let's pass some other attributes to make it visible. Let's pass a color attribute in our violin plot and set the color to maybe, let's say 0.6. Let's see what it looks like. Now it's much more visible, right? If we pass a color attribute of 0.4, it looks darker. So let's pass a higher number, 0.9. Okay, it's much more visible now. So you can play around with this color attribute so that you can clearly see both of your plots on the same graph. So that's how we can draw a strip plot and violin plot on the same graph. Make sure you have both of the methods in the same cell. Otherwise, you'll get a separate plot on different graphs. Great. That's all I have for the lecture on strip plots. Go over it and then see the examples that we saw and try to draw a strip plot for different variable combinations on your X and Y axis. Great.